Hi, everybody. My name is Josh Braganza. Today I'll be talking about the need for and implementation of child protection policies, primarily in faith-based communities. So a quick overview, I'm going to be talking about an introduction about myself. What is a child protection policy? What does Michigan law say? Why should faith-based communities adopt a policy? How, how should we react after abuse is disclosed? And what next? So a quick introduction. My name is Josh Braganza, like I said, and Chelsea said. I'm a sophomore at Indiana Wesleyan University studying criminal justice and entrepreneurship. I found this job looking for jobs to fulfill my criminal justice internship, my 120 hours on that. And I'm just looking through LinkedIn and found this one um, as a policy research intern. And so I've been doing research all year long and finally get to share this with you guys. I came to know Christ at an early age, and I am an adamant Christian. So seeing how this can be used in the church and help churches create proactive policies to protect and care for their children really inspired me in taking on this job. I would like to start off with the content warning. This presentation is about child sexual abuse, a topic that is disturbing to many people. So if you need to turn off your camera, get up, walk away, take a break, whatever it is, please do. It won't offend me. It's fine to take care of yourself during this presentation. So beginning, we'd like to start off by talking about the difference between policies and laws. So a policy is an informal agenda set by an organization to meet goals by fighting for their cause within its jurisdiction. And it differs from a law because a law is more of a formal standard, usually given by local, state, or federal government to ensure justice is being served. And so unkept laws can result in consequences, whereas policies are more of a set standard for an organization to see how their organization will be structured. So what is a child protection policy? The definition, child protection policy is an organization's formal commitment to caring for a child's physical and emotional well-being by protecting them from danger or harm. And so one of the questions that came forward with searching a child protection policy at the beginning of my research was, are there any legal requirements in the state of Michigan? And currently there are no requirements set for Michigan, meaning that no organizations are required to have a child protection policy. But a quick study from a National Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Children showed that they encourage high schools, middle schools, elementary systems, churches, and scouting to implement a child protection policy, primarily because they are dealing with children at the age group of like 0 to 18. And they a lot of times will have alone time with children or free time where they're just adults and children together, which could be a havoc for disaster as we talk about child abuse. So what should be included in a child protection policy? This is a tough question because there's not one set standard thing for a child protection policy because it'll differ from organization to organization. But there are some basic guidelines I found from Children's International that help describe what your organization should put in your child protection policy. So the first one being protecting children's rights and their best interest. So making that clear in your policy and showing that you care for your children and everything that they stand for in your organization, so that your organization, leaders, employees know that children come first when it comes to child protection. Secondly, placing the children as the first priority when dealing with all identified or suspected cases of child abuse. So this kind of goes off of not caring for like the hierarchy of needs or people in an organization. So whether it be your boss or somebody of high authority, not just listening to them, but caring for the children as the first priority. Empowering and educating children on their rights, personal safety, and steps they can take. So letting know the children like what's going on. A lot of times children will not really know what's going on. So telling them what's going on and educating them about that, and then letting them know their rights as a child and that this child abuse is not okay. Integrating child protection into all aspects of our organization strategy, structures, and work practices. So making sure that your work practices aren't creating places where children will be like alone with adults or anything that will or could lead to child abuse. And then lastly, just having zero tolerance for child abuse, whether that be in the workplace or anywhere around the organization. So I have here an example of a child protection policy statement I found from this guideline. You can read the full document there if you want to look at it later, and I'll also include it in my resources. But this is a good example if you're creating a child protection policy and you don't really know where to start. So you would just fill in your organization is fully committed to safeguarding the welfare of all children and young people. It recognizes its responsibility to take all reasonable steps to prompt safe practice and to protect children from harm, abuse, and exploitation. Acknowledges its duty to act appropriately to any allegations, reports, or suspicions of abuse. And then you could read the rest, but it's basically staying like those guidelines stated. You are putting children at the forefront of this protection policy, and you're letting your staff members know that you have this policy enacted, and if they are a mandatory reporter, which we will talk about later, that they must and have to report abuse. And so here's the first page of the policy. And like I said, you could read the full document there. So moving on to, after we talked about what a policy is, we want to talk about what does the Michigan law say about child protection policy. There's only one federal regulation right now for child abuse, which is the Child Abuse Prevention and Treatment Act, or CAPTA. But this was enacted January 31st, 1974, reapproved later in 2010. But it ensured the prevention, assessment, identification, and treatment of child abuse. So this was a federal law created for all states in the United States to abide under. It also supported the states with federal funding so they can, the organizations that are protecting children from child abuse do get some federal funding in that. And then the Reauthorization Act of 2010 kind of improved and reinforced the previous CAPTA by defining some more definitions and including some more funding. Then moving on to the state law in Michigan, there is currently one law in Michigan, which is the 1975 Child Protection Law, which requires school teachers, counselors, pastors, or other people in authority to report any suspicion. And then I'll include a list of all who are required later on. But this did not just limit these mandated reporters to report, but it encouraged all people to report a suspected child abuse. So basically, if you see something, do say something. These top people right here are required to report child abuse, but they encourage everybody to report it if they do see something. And then this provided a good structure for CPS to investigate issues of child abuse as they come and investigate some cases in the law, and they can go back to this child protection law and see who is a mandated reporter and who is not. So these are the required reporters for Michigan. I'll let you read this. It's a long list located in that Michigan law. But some examples are physicians, teachers, law enforcement officers, dentists, and so on. So what are the penalties for reporting abuse? As I said, the mandated reporters are mandated by law. So section 722-633 of Michigan's child protection law states that there are two types of penalties for reporting child abuse, one being civil action, which will be taken up in civil court, and then criminal action. So for the civil action, the accused is held liable for all damages that any person suffers due to the mandated reporter's failure to file a report, meaning that if a mandated reporter does not say something, that they can be held liable for any of the damage that the judge or jury sees fit in the case. And then for the criminal action, the accused is put in prison for up to 93 days and or fined for up to $500. So being a mandated reporter, it is your responsibility to report. And if you do not, CPS and other investigative units will come and see if you are doing that or not, and you will be held liable if you are not doing that. And then only a person under the good faith report is protected from a civil and criminal violations. And so for the good faith report, it basically states that if you did say something because you saw the reasonable suspicion of child abuse and it ended up not being child abuse, you are not held under the civil action and criminal action. So what are the long-term implications of child sexual abuse if left untreated? So I did some research and found that the long-term implications include high levels of depression, anxiety, guilt, dissociative patterns, shame, repression, self-blame, denial, eating disorders, sexual problems, somatic concerns, and relationship problems. But out of all those, depression is the most common long-term symptom of survivors. And this includes feeling down much of the time, having suicidal ideation, and so forth. And so a statistics I found stated that 28 to 33% of women and 12 to 18% of men are victims of childhood or adolescent abuse. So these percentages of people do struggle with these long-term effects and implications. So why should faith communities adopt a policy? That's a question that has been going on for a while, as people might disagree why a faith community like a church or another community needs one. But I found that faith-based organizations can bridge the gap between child protection agencies and families, as the trust has been lacking over the years. Because a child protection policy creates a family to be more vulnerable with the organization they are already comfortable with, it allows them to go to their church or faith-based community for the problems of child abuse. So going on that, many faith-based communities adopt policies because they believe that safety is a priority in all children and families' lives. And so I did some more research about what that safety meant to them. And then according to Maslow's hierarchy of needs, if they believe that safety is a big priority, they will see that safety is right under the psychological needs, which is the basic needs, which would be food, water, warmth, and rest. And then right there is safety, which is like security. So safety is even more important than the needs of belonging, esteem, and self-actualization. So this kind of just shows why a faith-based community should implement a child protection policy if they believe that safety is a number one priority. And then moving forward to some spiritual basis for reporting abuse. Some commonly twisted scriptures I found, and also with a couple of my interviews, were that don't gossip. So a lot of people will twist the scriptures and say, well, I can't report abuse because that would be gossip. But they do not realize that when you're reporting abuse and saying something, you're protecting that child. Another one is forgiveness in scripture. Some people believe that forgiveness covers up the consequence, which is not correct. So a lot of times people will be like, well, they abused it, they were forgiven, nothing else should happen. But an example I found in the Bible was the two thieves on the cross next to Jesus as he was dying. One of the thieves admitted for his consequences and said he deserved his consequences. And in doing that, he was repentant and was deserving of forgiveness, as the other one tried to get out of his consequence and he was not repentant to Christ. And as we see with those two thieves, both ended up still dying on the cross, deserving their consequence. And so with child abuse, there's still going to be a consequence for the perpetrator, regardless of if you say something or not. So it's better to say something than to not. And then a couple more. Matthew 18:15 talks about going one-on-one after a problem has been accrued between two people. And a lot of times people misconstrue that with a child and an adult, as they are different levels of authority. So say a 13-year-old just got abused by a youth pastor in the church. Going one-on-one is probably not the best idea for them to see their perpetrator right away. And so using that scripture against going one-on-one to fix the problem is not best fit when dealing with cases of child abuse. And then lastly, sexual assault in the Old Testament. A lot of times in the Old Testament, sexual assault, if a adult abused or assaulted a young person and they did not make a sound, that was a sign of consent. And some people will twist that and say today, if a perpetrator is abusing a young person and they do not make a sound, that is consent. But as we know it, consent is verbal consent by the child, and knowing the regulations by the age of a child if they're under 18 or not. And then some biblical truths I found were Mark 9:42 and Proverbs 22:6. I will read Mark 9:42 for you. If anyone causes one of these little ones to stumble, who does believe in me, it would be better for them if a large millstone were hung around their necks and they were thrown into the sea. So it kind of talks about Jesus is talking about how much he cares for his children and not letting them stumble, whether that be, I think we can all agree that abuse is letting that child stumble. And as we saw in the long-term effects, depression and things like that, they will be stumbling the rest of their lives. And then the Proverbs 22:6, I will let you read just for time's sake, but it's another one about training your children upright. And with child abuse, you're not really training that child upright, but rather damaging them for the rest of their lives. And so I had a chance to interview Pete Singer. He is the executive director of Grace. And I got to talk to him a little bit about his story and how he got interested in child protection and how he started his organization. So I'd like to play this little snippet that I got from the video.
Background kind of made me passionate about this area is growing up in pretty abusive faith community. Primarily in elementary school is when it was the most abusive. We went to, we grew up in an IFB church.
Okay.
Growing up in an IFB church, there was a lot of emphasis on authority and things like that. But there was also pretty rampant physical and sexual abuse throughout the church and the school. One of the people that it affected pretty heavily was one of my closest friends. His name was Bobby. His dad was one of the pastors at the church.
Oh, wow.
And Bobby's dad was viciously abusing him and his mom and his siblings in pretty much every way imaginable, sexually, physically, just outright humiliation and degradation. And at one point, Bobby's mom went to the lead pastor of the church and explained everything that was going on. And the pastor replied to her, the problem here is obvious. You're not adequately submitting. And if you adequately submit, the abuse will stop.
Yeah.
It didn't. Bobby's dad eventually killed one of Bobby's brothers. And then in order to save the rest of the kids, Bobby's mom killed Bobby's dad.
As we saw in that video, Pete's telling a little story of one of his childhood friends being abused by his father, and just how the wife would go to the leadership, the pastor, telling him what he saw fit, and he was just saying they were not submitting adequately. So in that case, if there were a child protection policy, you could go to the head of that child protection policy or go back to the policy and what it reads and what all members have abided by, and take that to state or federal law. Because in that situation, the authority, in that case, the pastor, did not really see the child abuse like she was seeing with her family. And it just ended up in a couple of deaths, which is very unfortunate.
Background kind of made me passionate about.
So how should we react after abuse is disclosed is the next question I've come to. How to react responsibly. I looked up an article from Darkness to Light and gave a couple ways to react responsibly to child abuse. One, believing the child and making sure the child knows it. So believing what the child tells you and not just taking it for a grain of salt, and showing that you are there for them and know what they're saying. Thanking the child for telling you and praising the child's courage. That can be a big thing for a child to share off their heart, and a scary thing to relive that. So just thanking them for that. Encouraging the child to talk, but don't ask leading questions about details. So letting that child talk for as much as they can about it or want to talk about, and not just pressuring them to get all the details, is a big way to react responsibly to child abuse. Seeking the help of a professional who's trained to interview. As we'll talk about later, there are some trained forensic interview professionals that are trained to specifically interview children. Assure the child that it's your responsibility to protect him or her, and that you'll do everything you can. And then report or take action in all cases, whether that be if you're a mandated reporter or not. And then number one thing, just don't panic in the situation. Don't freak out if what a child is telling you is scary or you can't believe who did that. Just don't panic and be calm in whatever you do. And there are several ways to report abuse. Obviously, if it's immediate danger, call 911 right away. But we also have the Child Help National Child Abuse Hotline and Crisis Text Line. And then for locally, we have the Michigan Department of Health and Human Services. And then a new thing that happened this year is a cyber tip line that provides information about how to find online sexual exploitation of children. And if you suspect that your child has been contacted online, it is a little hotline for you to go to and search if you think that your child has been exploited online. And as I mentioned earlier, the forensic interview process. So a lot of child advocacy centers like Small Talk have a forensic interviewer. And what this basically does, it provides a child an opportunity to talk with a specialized professional about the reason for their visit, primarily for children who have been abused. It minimizes the number of times the child is interviewed and limits the number of people who interview the child. So a good thing about this, usually there'll be one or two forensic interviews in a room with a child. And so instead of having CPS, prosecutors, and law enforcement all interviewing the same child, all going in the same room, which can scare the child, this helps the child just talk to one person at their level. And then it also limits the number, like I said, the number of people who interview and the number of times you interview. So you're not interviewing the child and making them relive their moment another time that they need to. And so some services available at Small Talk, the forensic interviewing. We also have mental health therapy, victim advocacy, and court accompaniment, and prevention education. There's a quote that we found from a person who came to Small Talk. I'm a two-time Olympian, but more importantly, I'm a survivor of childhood sexual abuse. Places like Small Talk help victims like me become survivors. So it just shows that this Olympic swimmer, even though she's won twice in the Olympics, like overcoming child abuse was a more important thing to her. And places like Small Talk and other advocacy centers can help you cope with the trauma. So what's next? There are some resources for game planning your policy. As I mentioned, Pete's organization, Grace, Godly Response to Abuse within the Christian environment. Sacred Spaces is one, builds healthy Jewish communities and partnering with child protection policies and safeguarding policies. And then I listed that link to the example child protection policy if you'd like to look at that and compare it to what you create. And then just some recommended books you can go back and read that Pete actually gave me as some good resources if you are creating your child protection policy. And then we have some local resources. The Diocese of Lansing, which is the Office of the Bishop in Lansing, deals with child protection, and you can go there and get help from them. Spirit Fire is another one. It's a fellowship of survivors of abuse within the church who can kind of share what they've went through, and it's kind of just a fellowship of people who share their struggles in the past. And then the Mario Goretti Network and Havica, which Havica stands for Help for Adult Victims of Child Abuse. And so this is a QR code. If you want to scan it, we will soon have a toolkit on the Small Talk website, which will include this video and then those resources I mentioned earlier. And then I would just like to thank Chelsea and the staff at Small Talk for giving me this opportunity for the internship. I also want to thank all the people I was able to interview, Marina, Pete, Aubrey, and Thomas, for the generosity and giving their time to me. And then this research has helped me a lot and taught me a lot of new things that I've not learned before. And so I'm grateful to have this new knowledge and go forward in the future with it. So thank you for listening. And here are some of my works cited and some contact information.